Om Gyana-timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Padamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahakana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshri Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasati Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, everyone. So just before I forget, and I will forget if I don't bring it up now, we won't be having class next weekend or the weekend after, because they both fall on public holiday weekends, and I don't want to get in the way of your vacation plans. So we won't be having any sessions over the next 2 weekends, but then so this will be the last of the year then. However, I'll see you all the first Sunday back in January. Secondly, because of that, the New Year's due date is maybe a bit premature because we wouldn't have finished the 3rd chapter by the end of the year, which was my plan. I forgot to factor in the fact that we will be missing the last 2 Sundays. So the first question, is terrorism allowed in the Bhagavad-gītā? That question is still due on New Year's. However, the second question about Varnashram and Bhakti Yoga and so on and so forth, that one is going to be due. Let me just get the date up. I wrote it in my calendar. That one is due on January the 17th. So that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time. It shouldn't be too hard. As I said, I just want to give you all a lot of time so you don't stress too hard for the first one. The next time I drop them, I'll probably drop them like 2 weeks in advance or something. I won't give you guys like 2 months to do them. So please get them done. I've just given you all some time so you can figure out the format and all. I hope all of you have started. If you haven't, I would start now. Okay.
Sorry,
yes,
Prabhu.
yes.
The first question, we have to submit it by January 1st?
Yes, by January 1st.
And do we just email it to you?
Yes, just email it to me. My email is pretty easy, tilak@iskon.com.au.
Okay. And it's just a 600-word format, right? I mean, 600-word Word document. Yeah,
so 600 words. Try and structure it. In the Mayapur Institute handbook, there's a little structure. I'm not too fussed if you don't strictly follow that structure. I'm just recommending it because it might help you if you're a little, concerned about how you want to structure it. But that structure there is nice. Otherwise, anything that's remotely structured, I'm not going to be too upset. Just, introduce it, discuss it, and then conclude it. 600 words, you can't really do much else with it. Please use citations. You don't need to use any complex citation system, just a footnote, or you can do it in brackets if you want. BG 2.7, and then put a P if it's from the purport, and just leave it blank if it's from the text.
Okay.
That's pretty much my only request. And besides that, answer the question, and then I think you should be good. 600 words, and I can't remember now. I think I said a 10% leeway. So you can go like 60, 70 words over, but please don't write 800 words.
Yeah.
Because I won't have the time to read it all. And also Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj, he says, and not that I think you'll do this, I'm just throwing this out for everyone. Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj says, if you can't write something in a few words and you need a lot of words, it means you don't understand it at all. Which I like, because yeah, it's not necessarily better to have a lot of words. So 600 words, you can go up to even up to 700, but please no more than that. Even one word over will be too much. So aim for 600 to 660.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Prabhu.
No problem. Feel free to email it in any format, Word document, PDF. You can even write it straight into the email. I'm not too disconcerted about it. Okay, any other questions regarding the assignments and all? Okay, so sorry, I was not here last week. Initially, I was going to feel bad, but now I feel bad for coming back, because Abhishek Prabhu is very nice to, he's much better than I am. So sucks for you. I am back now this week. I haven't had time yet to watch the recording. I've still been busy, but I talked to Prabhu afterwards, so I have a rough idea of what he's gone over. If I start talking about something and I reference something that he didn't already bring up, or if I'm talking about something and he's already fully discussed this, just tell me and we'll keep on going. I did hear tidbits. I ducked in and out, but I did not hear the whole thing. So please bear with me if I'm a bit repetitive. Okay, now let me share my screen and we can begin going ahead. Okay, we can all see my screen. And I was told, actually, I'll bring this up before we continue. I was told that everyone really liked Prabhu's way of writing onto the screen, of typing onto the screen, as we discussed. So if you all really enjoyed that, I'll start doing that next year when we get around to it. So yeah, unless anyone dissents to that. Okay, so because Prabhu already discussed a lot of the theoretical, analytical sort of underpinnings, right, of the section, I feel like the big emphasis was on the yoga ladder. If I recall correctly, you didn't begin studying the shlokas at all, right? It was all just the yoga ladder. So because of that, today we're just going to be a bit more textual. I'm sure you all have a much more in-depth understanding of the yoga ladder. That's always the first thing to discuss after, I think, the second chapter, because Krishna himself does not give a very, very analytical, or rather a very structured and systematic overview of the yoga ladder in the second chapter, because he sort of condensed it all down, right? And again, as I've said, our acharyas, they commented on this. The second chapter is highly condensed. It's got all the content in there, but it's not exactly spelling it out, right? It's a little bit confusing. So that's why it's always good to discuss that. So we're just going to be mainly going through the texts themselves this week, because last week already covered a lot of the the philosophical structuring behind it. And that's very much what the third chapter is about. The third chapter is about these rungs of the yoga ladder. But before we fully go into it, I just wanted to go through a few quotes that I've taken out from the third chapter. I always think it's nice, Prabhupada in every chapter, he's given some quotes in his purports explaining what each chapter is about. And even though, as we quote many different acharyas, I still think Srila Prabhupada, we are studying in Bhakti-śāstrī. We don't have so much time. And even if we had all the time in the world, still Prabhupada's vision of the Bhagavad-gītā is still very satisfying, right? So I like to situate everything in the Bhagavad-gītā as it is that Srila Prabhupada perceived and interpreted and gave it. Maybe we can have, I'm assuming Vishaka is Rohan.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Rohan, Prabhu, would you like to read out the first two quotes?
Yeah, sure. Karma yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness. In other words, he wanted to skillfully avoid the fighting by using Krishna consciousness as an excuse. But as a sincere student, he placed the matter before his master and questioned Krishna as to his best course of action. In answer, Lord Krishna elaborately explained Karma Yoga, or work in Krishna consciousness, in this third chapter.
Got it. So here we find, this is Srila Prabhupada. He's laying his cards on the table. I remember one pastime, Srila Prabhupada once, there was somebody criticizing Prabhupada's Bhagavad-gītā as it is, right? There's one guy, and he was saying, this Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, he was saying, this was in the days before they called, was in the days? Anyways, that's what he said. Some academic, some scholar. And he said, throughout the whole Bhagavad-gītā, whenever it says Karma Yoga, he's writing Bhakti. Whenever it says Buddhi Yoga, he's saying Bhakti. All the time. All that he is doing is he's writing the Bhagavad-gītā. No matter what it says, he is writing that this is devotional service. And so he was writing this big critique. And so some disciples of Srila Prabhupada, they read this and they went to Prabhupada. And they asked Prabhupada, they said, Srila Prabhupada, you know, this person, he's criticizing the he's commenting about the Bhagavad-gītā as it is. And Prabhupada said, oh, you know, what are they saying? And they said, Srila Prabhupada, he's saying that, you know, no matter what you're talking, all of the shlokas, if it's saying Karma Yoga, if it's saying Buddhi Yoga, if it's saying anything, Gyana Yoga, no matter what's being said, you always translate it as Bhakti or devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada, his eyes went big and he said, oh, he is very intelligent. He's understood exactly what I'm doing. He has understood my Bhagavad-gītā as it is. So that's what Srila Prabhupada said. So, and that's very much Prabhupada, he's laying his cards on the table, right? Prabhupada, he's gone through the Bhagavad-gītā, right? He's found the absolute conclusion, and now he's pulling it out wherever he can find it. That's not to say he's twisting the text, as we, I think, spent a fair bit of time discussing in the second chapter. Even though you can take things somewhere, you can also take them in the Bhakti way. It's not that Prabhupada will show Bhakti where it isn't. But where there's even a seed of Bhakti, he makes sure there's the full blossomed flower in the Bhagavad-gītā as it is. And so we find that in Karma Yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness. This is the title Prabhupada gives. If you just read the table of contents, you will find one name for the chapter. But often if you read the end of the chapter, it'll say, thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports for chapter 3 of the Bhagavad-gītā, titled whatever, and often there'll be an elaboration on the title. So yeah. And then, of course, we find Arjuna's first initial question, Arjuna's excuse, which is that he wants to renounce the world using Krishna consciousness. How exactly? We will get to that when we discuss the first two texts. Maybe then we can have Bhumi-gita Mataji. Would you like to read the big quote underneath?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you. This third chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without considering impersonal voidness the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by the propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overloading and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditional soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up the work and prescribed duties of all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter.
Jai. So it's a bit of a lengthy description, but hopefully after we've concluded our study of this chapter, which should only be 1 or 2 weeks into January, once we've concluded our discussion of this chapter, then we will hopefully be able to see how exactly all of that is done. Now, because we had that slight disruption last week, I can't exactly remember. Did I ever tell you to finish the 3rd chapter in your readings, or did I say to get halfway?
3 to 16 it was, I think.
Yes, okay, so I said to go halfway. Okay, so that'll be the half that we're discussing today. The next half, just finish the 3rd chapter and do the assignments and study your shlokas. That can be your homework for our 2-week break. So I have a little overview of the 3rd chapter. And the 3rd chapter, if you read Gita Subodhini, I really like this way they've split it up as a circle. It's also how I learned it when I did Bhakti-śāstrī. I'm not sure who started the circle analysis. I haven't found it in the Acharya's commentaries, but I think it really reflects the structure of the 3rd chapter well. Because Krishna, he's presenting really two arguments to do the same thing, right? So we'll start off with Arjuna's confusion, and we'll get to Arjuna's confusion. I'm pretty sure Abhishek Prabhu touched upon this, right? He was contrasting the 3rd and 5th chapters with Arjuna. What is the difference between Arjuna's confusions, right, in those 2 chapters? By determining the confusion in those 2 chapters, we can really get a good understanding of the confusion in this chapter. So I won't touch on that too much. So what happens is, so Arjuna, he presents him, why are you making me do this ghastly, terrible work, right? You're confusing me, Krishna. And so Krishna, he sort of presents down 2 different arguments practically to tell Arjuna to do Nishkama Karma Yoga. The first argumentation that he'll take, and the one that we will be discussing for the remainder of today, is that, well, I'm not saying to renounce, right? I'm saying you must qualify yourself to renounce. And the best way to qualify your renunciation is through Nishkama Karma Yoga. Because, as we study the text, it'll become incredibly clear, Arjuna's confusion is that he thinks the whole Vivekananda approach, right? And there's all these different pathways, and they're all equally good, and they're all of the parts of the ladder are a ladder in of themselves, right? And so he's confused. Why are you giving me all of these options? Why are you telling me all of these things? After we read the 2nd chapter, we can be a little confused, Even I'm confused, right? It's really complex what's going on. And so Arjuna, he's saying, you've given me all of these different options, and now you're pushing me to do what? Buddhi yoga, right? How many times is the word buddhi? If you read the Sanskrit, the word buddhi is used like 11 times or something, right? In the concluding part of the 2nd chapter. So Arjuna, he's hearing that and he's thinking, so you're telling me to do buddhi yoga, to, engage my intelligence. You're telling me to renounce. You're telling me all of these things, you're telling me to pull my senses away like a tortoise and all of these things. And then you're telling me to still engage in fighting. I'm all very, very confused, right? So this is the confusion Arjuna has. And so Krishna now, he's going to clarify. Baladev Vidyabhushan, he says, chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, they are all just elaborating the yoga ladder after Arjuna getting really confused about it in the 2nd chapter. And so here, now he's explaining, well, why did I talk about Nishkama Karma Yoga, right? Why am I encouraging you to do this? So this whole chapter is elaborating on that. And then we have it. The first half, he's saying it's not very easy to just go meditate, right? And as I always say, we can all practically experience this whenever we sit down and try to chant our rounds, right? Our rounds are so nectarian, actually, compared to just counting the breath or something. Srila Prabhupada would say is blowing your nose, right? It's much more nectarian, and yet it's still very hard, right? So this is what he's saying. You should qualify yourself before engaging in Gyana and renunciation through Nishkama Karma Yoga. And then the next half will be, even if you are qualified, in your position, it would be better to set a good example by performing Nishkama Karma Yoga, right? For you specifically, you should set a good example, and you should still engage in it. And then we'll find lots of nice examples like Janaka Maharaj and so on and so forth. And then at the end, either way, no matter what you do, lust is a terrible enemy and must be conquered with spiritual intelligence. So the structure is actually pretty straightforward for this chapter. Don't let the circle scare you. But as you can see, it's sort of Krishna, he takes Arjuna's question, he answers it in two different ways, and then he concludes, irregardless of either way, you're performing Nishkama Karma Yoga. Now we're going to get to the main issue of the day, which is lust. Okay, so this is described. Different acharyas actually, to my knowledge, describe different questions, which is the specific question which confused Arjuna. But I'm going to go with this one just for the ease of the course. We won't discuss all the different options. Yes, yeah. If only Krishna had some PowerPoint slides in order to clarify the yoga ladder. Maybe we can have Varun Prabhu. Would you like to read out the Sanskrit and Shavina Mataji read out the English?
Yes, Prabhu. Sukha dukhe samay kritva labha labhau jaya jayau tato yuddhaya yujasva naivam papam avapyasi.
Do thou fight for the sake of fighting, without considering happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat, and by so doing you shall never incur sin.
So this is the text. Thank you very much. This is the text, right, which is said to set off Arjuna's mind, because Arjuna then thinks, what does he think? We can start then, we can open our Gitas to the 3rd chapter. Arjuna, he becomes very confused. And what does he say? He says, Jayasi chet karmanaste matta buddhir janardana tatkim karmani ghore mam niyojayasi keshava. Maybe Varun Prabhu, can you read out the English?
Yes. Does it start with do thou?
No. From the Gita, chapter 3. Chapter 3, text 1.
Sorry, just give me one moment.
Yeah. Maybe I'll let you find chapter 3, and then in the meantime, we can have Jaswant Prabhu read the English out.
Yes, Prabhu. Arjuna said, O Janardana, O Keshava, why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare? If you think that intelligence is better than fruitive work.
Yes, thank you. So Arjuna here, he's now confused, right? Oh, Janardan. Oh, Keshav. What am I meant to do, right? You've listed out so many options, and I think that can be very many of our questions, right? Even if we understand the yoga ladder, it's not exactly clear what Krishna is saying sometimes. Actually, it is clear if we remember from the 2nd chapter. Krishna, he says, but for you, for your qualification, for your adhikar, you should do this Nishkama Karma Yoga. But still, unless we have that really pointed out to us, it can be somewhat confusing. And so he asks this question. Interestingly, he says, Mom, right? Mom. Some acharyas have said that this Mom indicates Arjuna. He's saying, I'm your devotee. You wouldn't confuse me, right? You wouldn't confuse me about what to do. So please clarify. And of course, he continues his question in the 2nd text. Vyamishreneva vakyena buddhim mohayisiva me tadekam vadanschitya yena shreyo hamapnuyam. Then maybe we can have Uma Devi Mataji, would you please like to read out the English for text 2? I think Uma Mataji is AWOL. Let's have, yes. Okay, oh yeah, of course, Varun Prabhu, you got your Gita out. Yes, let's hear it from you.
My intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be most beneficial for me.
Jai. So now we find, right? Arjuna, he's fully established. He's very, very confused. One interesting word to note is iva. Mohayasi iva. So this word iva can be understood in many different ways. Iva, we might know, Tranadapi sunichena taror iva sahishnuna is one way it's said. We all know this shlok, right? Tranadapi sunichena taror api sahishnuna is how many people memorize it. There's two different versions that go around. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada writes iva, but whenever Prabhupada quotes it while speaking, he always says api. But if we take iva, iva means like, right? Taror iva sahishnuna, right? Like, in the manner of, similarly to, right? That's what this word can mean. It can also mean, as Prabhupada has given it in the word for word here, certainly. So this can indicate that Arjuna, he's saying, oh no, Krishna, you're not actually confusing me. It's just like you're confusing me. Again, it's continuing that theme. I'm your devotee. I'm dedicated to you. You wouldn't actually speak bewildering and confusing words. I understand that there is a logic in what you're saying. So please, because it doesn't seem very logical to me right now, please explain to me, right? What is it that you have said? There's also an indication here of Arjuna being a devotee. As we've said, he is bewildered by Yoga Maya, but still we'll find hints of Arjuna's devotional mood coming out. He's saying Iva, because he's saying, it is as if I am bewildered, but ultimately I know that devotional service is the supreme. Also, by his asking, he's saying, please tell me what is most beneficial for me. Because there's also a hint of him saying, honestly, I'm not satisfied with either one. Gyana or karma, either way, I just want bhakti, right? So we can find Iva, this term indicates many things. So having established his doubt, we then enter into Krishna's answer. And what do we hear? Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Lokesmin Dvivitha Nishtha Pura Prokta Mayanagha Gyana Yogena Sankhyanam Karma Yogena Yoginam. Maybe we can have Vignaraj Prabhu. Do you have your Gita with you? Can you read out the English?
Hare Krishna?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, which one was that?
3:3.
Yep. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O sinless Arjuna, I have already explained that there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical philosophical speculation, and others by devotional service.
Yes. So here we find again, as I mentioned before, the yoga ladder is not some construction, right? It's not something that we've come up with in order to give our spin on the Bhagavad-gītā. The yoga ladder is constructed explicitly from Krishna's statements. And how do we find that here? Nishtha. What does the word nishtha mean? Who knows? Who can tell me?
Steady, fixed. Steady,
fixed, yes. That is one meaning. But there are many levels of meaning to this word nishtha. But steady fixed is the one that I was going for. So we say it's steady fixed, but it's steady fixed on different platforms, right? So nishtha can indicate different platforms as well, right? Different platforms of steadiness and different platforms of being fixed. And we can find this. Why? Because the word is in the singular, right? So it's not referring to various types of faith, but rather it is referring to to be more situated in it. So what does this indicate? Here, Krishna, he is indicating the different levels of advancement up the yoga ladder, the different nishtas, the different qualifications, right? So some people, they are inclined towards Gyana, and others are inclined towards karma yoga. Now, again, we'll find this is a tension, and I remember tuning in last week, and Nandan Prabhu, tell me if I'm misrepresenting your question, but your question was, we're talking a lot about Nishkama Karma Yoga, but Prabhupada, he seems to talk about bhakti a lot in this chapter. Was that your question?
Yes, Prabhu. It was mine was more like, how do we read this chapter? Because obviously Prabhupada is emphasizing Krishna consciousness, but Krishna is speaking from a context. So do we apply both when we read it and see it in both ways, or do we just apply Prabhupada's way, or do we try to delineate between the two? That was my kind of thing. How do we approach this, essentially, was my question. And that the root question was, who's talking about what?
Yeah, and I can't remember, I had to dip. How did Abhishek Prabhu answer it?
I'm trying to recall myself, Prabhu. His view was, he gave the delineation in terms of the fact that at the start, it's about someone who's performing their duties because they are not at a stage where they're ready to be fixed in their practice. And so they need to engage in those duties. And that could either be one who is practicing Krishna consciousness, or be someone who is engaged in, fruitive work.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So I'm going to comment upon that from a very different angle. I just wanted to hear what Prabhu said so I don't contradict it, but I'm not contradicting it. I'm just
sorry, Prabhu. I might have missed.
No. That's all right. That's right. No, I'm just going to. I'm not contradicting him at all in what I'm going to say. I'm just going to answer it from a very different level. Purijan Prabhu, he says regarding these chapters that the difference that we can see now, the difference between Krishna and the devotee, that the devotee is much more merciful than Krishna is. Because Krishna, he gives the possibility of bhakti in the texts, but Prabhupada doesn't give any wiggle room, right? He's giving the full mercy coming out, right? Krishna, he gives the seed of bhakti, but Prabhupada, he gives the fullness of it. Both readings can really be justified, but Krishna is maybe, I don't want to say vague, but the actual Sanskrit words can sort of be taken both ways, and contextually, karma yoga might make more sense if we're reading this as a progressive description. However, we can really read it both ways. The text itself can sort of open it up in two ways, right? So where Krishna is vague, Srila Prabhupada is explicit. And Krishna is not vague, actually, even though we emphasized then the mercy of the devotee. Krishna is not necessarily vague as a sign that he doesn't necessarily recommend bhakti, but rather he's vague because he's giving the applicability of the two things, right? I would say that that right here, contextually, he's describing karma yoga, but the fulfillment of all of that karma yoga is devotional service. As we discussed before, the great reservoir of water can fulfill the purposes of all the small wells, and that does come out in these texts. But we'll also find it's not an unnatural reading to read it as describing devotional service. Which is why we'll read karma yogena in the Sanskrit, and then we'll find devotional service being the contrast. So if we take this text as referring to devotional service, right, then we are reading it, then Srila Prabhupada, he's making one point. But to answer Arjuna's direct question, I sort of want to take it as karma yoga right now, right? Because Arjuna, he's saying, what do I do? Why have you recommended this? And Krishna, he's saying that I've given these two paths because one is there for those who are not as qualified to do the other, right? Sometimes people, again, they get confused. They get the very Vivekananda style approach. And I'm not picking on Vivekananda. He's just the first person who's popping into my mind with, what is it? Totopot, totomoto, something like that. I can't remember how it goes. As many paths there is as many ways, is his famous quote. And so what Krishna is saying is he's saying there's not actually all these multiple things. There's actually two general goals we can find in the Vedic literature. Can anyone guess what are those two general goals? One goal is bhakti, right? That is one goal you can achieve. And the other one is Gyana. Ultimately, the yoga ladder really ends either in Gyana or bhakti. Now you might say, well, bhakti is above Gyana. We can say because the liberation of Gyana, eventually one will fall down from the Brahmajyoti again, right? So it's not a fulfilling conclusion. And therefore, ultimately, bhakti is there. But one can end samsara either going down the path of Gyana or down the path of bhakti. Does that make sense? So one can either go for Gyana or they can go for bhakti. It is not that one can go for karma yoga and then end samsara. Karma yoga is entirely there to qualify one to reach the platform of Gyana. I'm sure you discussed all of this last week, so I won't get into it too much. So this is what the point that Krishna is making. He's saying, I've given this for the different gradations, for the different qualities of people. Then the next text. Na karmanam anarambhan naishkarmyam purusho shnute na cha sanyasana deva siddhim samadhigacchati. Maybe we can have Mrunal Mataji. Would you like to read out the English?
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So now Krishna, he's making the point. By not doing your work, you're not going to achieve anything, right? And this is a point he's going to flesh out later on. Not merely by abstaining work can one achieve freedom from reaction. And this makes sense, right? Because if you don't do anything, you can't get any fruits. And if you can't get any fruits, you're not going to reach any goal, right? Of course, when we condemn fruits throughout the whole text, we're condemning material fruits, right? But we don't have an issue with fruits like bhakti and the mercy of the devotees, or even fruits like Gyana. We also need to distinguish between Gyana and Gyana yoga. Just because Gyana yoga is seen as inferior doesn't mean Gyana is seen as inferior. When we go to Bhagavatam class, which Srila Prabhupada was very passionate about us doing, what do? It's not that we're not getting any Gyana, right? Not that we're not getting any knowledge, but hopefully we're using that knowledge in Bhakti yoga, not in Gyana yoga. So, but not by doing nothing, you can't get anywhere, right? You can't, by doing nothing, you can't get anywhere. So renunciation alone cannot allow one to achieve perfection. And so this is now coming to a theme which Krishna is going to build out in order to talk about the necessity of Nishkama Karma Yoga, which is that no one can do nothing, right? And that's not a double negative. It is saying that no one really can be situated in doing nothing. In this case, very specifically, he means Arjuna. But we'll find in the next text, Nahi kaschit kshanam api jatu tishthatya karma krit karyate hyavasha karma sarva prakriti jair gunaha. Let's have Shivam Prabhu read the English here.
Everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment.
Right? So no one can cease acting, right? Because at the very least, somebody must eat, right? Somebody must breathe. Very, very advanced yogis, they won't breathe, right? But Prabhupada clarifies in his purport, it is not a question of embodied life, but it is the nature of the soul to always be active. And this is again, pointing out Nandan Prabhu's dichotomy that he sort of uncovered in the third chapter, and that all serious study of the third chapter will uncover, right? Because Krishna right there, he's saying that until you become on the level of those yogis who can not breathe and stand on their hand and do all sorts of things. I'm sure I don't know how many of you have seen the photo. There's one yogi in the Himalayas. He's held his hand up for like a few decades in the sky, and you can see his hand is like decaying away, and his hand, actually the way his nails have grown is they've grown like a tree almost, like all the nails are just going down his hand. You can see the photos. Until you're on that level, right? You're just going to be distracted, right? Until you really can renounce all of the needs and actions of your body, what's the point? But Prabhupada says this goes even deeper, right? And he's bringing up the point of the Sthita Pragya. Who should I pick on? Nitai Prabhu, I'm going to pick on you because you sneezed. What was the central point of Prabhupada's points in the Sthita Pragya section? What was he saying about the sense control of the Sthita Pragya?
You caught me off guard. I was
how can somebody properly achieve the position of the Sthita Pragya? Remember, we were discussing this.
I don't remember, sorry.
Okay, who can help him out? What is Prabhupada is emphasizing one central meditation that we should keep in mind in order to be like the Sthita Pragya?
But to act like a tortoise, like you pull your senses inside.
Yes.
You have a full control on it, only expose what is absolutely required.
Yes, correct. And in the purport, how does Prabhupada say you can do this? In all of the purports, he's stressing one central thing about this sense control. How can we control the senses?
It's about engaging in devotional service.
Yes, correct. That's it. So how can we control the senses? The senses are going here, they're going there, right? And Prabhupada, he's saying that actually activity is not just something that's part of the senses. It's not just something that's part of the body. It is there on the platform of the soul, right? It is there on the platform of the soul. When somebody dies, what happens? What happens when somebody dies? What's left their body? Is it their senses?
Their chitta, all the experiences and everything.
The chitta is gone, and what is carried within the chitta is the soul, right? So in one sense, you can even say the senses then, if you wanted to go forward, because the senses also exist in a subtle form. But ultimately, when the soul is gone, what happens to the body, right? Then the body really becomes inactive, right? So when the soul is gone, then inactivity happens. So how can we attribute activity just to the body, right? Because when somebody's dead, then they're very, very inactive. So clearly activity comes from the soul, right? And activity is the nature of the soul. So Prabhupada is making this point. And what does this have to do with the Sthita Pragya? Because this is how we can draw out Krishna consciousness here. Prabhupada, he's saying this restlessness, all of this, ultimately, it is not a problem that needs to be cured. It is a problem that needs to be engaged, right? So in Krishna consciousness, we find the full fulfillment of all of this, right? Of course, in one sense, Krishna, he's saying, do all of this meditation, do this nishkama karma yoga so that you can conquer the senses and therefore meditate, right? But Srila Prabhupada, he's pulling out the point. What happens to the Jivas, Mrugank Prabhu, what happens to the Jivas when they enter into the Brahmajyoti, when they attain liberation? After having Gyana, they merge into the impersonal Brahman.
They get bored.
They get bored and they drop down, right? So they get bored. Why? Because it is the nature of the jiva to be restless. It is the nature of the jiva to want to be active, right? They get bored and they fall down. So therefore, even though all of this is being said, Prabhupada, he's drawing out this point. What truly addresses this problem, if you will, is not repressing it. It is not stifling it. It is engaging it in devotional service, right? And how can it be? This is not some dogmatic sectarian assertion, right? Assertion, rather. This is not just saying, oh, well, bhakti is better. It naturally flows because what is the object of bhakti, right? The object of Gyana is the breath, existence itself. The object of different yoga practices are maybe the super soul, right? The presence of the Supreme Lord in the heart. But what is the object of bhakti yoga? But Shyama Sundar, right? That beautiful, all-attractive Krishna, right? When Krishna was dancing on Kaliya's heads, I don't know how many of you have read in Krishna book, right? When Krishna, he dances on Kaliya's heads. What happens is all the demigods, they come and they also take part in this, right? Everyone is present. Indra is a talented mridanga player. So Indra, he's playing the mridanga, and Narad Muni, he's playing his veena. And everyone is playing music in order to go along with the beat. But no one dances except for Krishna. Because Krishna, he has completely stolen the center of attention towards himself. Who could dance? Because then they would try to be competing against Krishna. But how can you compete against Krishna, right? Krishna, he has stolen all of their senses away. When Govardhan Hill was being lifted, it is said everyone was focused purely and solely on Krishna, right? Everyone who was there, he was at the center, and all of them, it was like the radius of a circle, right? It was all pointing towards that one center. And everyone felt that they were equally close to Krishna because they were so absorbed in him that they could not notice anyone else, right? This is the all-attractive Krishna, right? So when we have a conception of the supreme truth, when we have a conception of the Supreme Personality, which is not understood in terms of existence necessarily, of power necessarily, but the conquest of beauty over all other power, then naturally, it is not a dogmatic assertion to say that naturally this would be the most ideal way to conquer one's senses. And then to say that what is the natural response to beauty is love. Then it is natural to say that bhakti, therefore devotion, is the ultimate solution to the problem of the restless soul, because then the soul can express its restlessness fully in the shelter of devotional service, right? So like this, we can understand there are two things happening here. Yes, there's also karma yoga, but Prabhupada, so mercifully, he's pulling out this natural implication of bhakti yoga. Okay, we'll go on. We'll go on to the next text. So now, Krishna, he's making the point, right? He's making the point regarding the nature of those who do not appropriately engage in what they are qualified for. Chicken-eating swamis is a reference to one class given by His Holiness Tamal Krishna Goswami. I highly recommend it to any and all of you. I don't know how many of you have seen that class. It's on YouTube. It's very nice. He's just out there challenging everyone. Completely. It's in Fiji, if I remember correctly. He's just there destroying everyone. Yes, chicken-eating sannyasis don't go back to Godhead. That's the name of the video. That video was just too long to put in the slide, so I reduced it down. But it's very, and it's addressing this issue, right? And it's an issue for sure, right? We'll read out the shlok and then we'll discuss it. Karmendriyani samyamya ya aste manasasmaran indriyarthan vimudhatma mityachara sa uchyate. Maybe we can have then Sri Mataji, would you like to read out the English?
Hare Krishna, it's one who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender.
Jai. So this is a very common phenomenon. And again, our practical experience reflects the truth of Krishna's statements here. I've put together some of these comics from Guru Nishtha Prabhu. Guru Nishtha Prabhu, he does these cute little web comics, and this is a theme he often touches upon in his web comics, right? This false renunciation, right? The false sannyasi. The word that's used is a mityacharaha, the hypocrite, the pretender, right? And this is a word that's used to condemn those, right, who are making a big deal of restraining their senses, but inside, what are they talking about, right? Inside, what are they thinking about, right? They have not controlled their senses, and therefore, their meditation is on nothing. And we can see this so often, right? I still remember, I forgot his name, and anyways, probably better not to use his name. There was one Mayavadi sannyasi, right? And a lot of researchers were very excited. He was used for experiments, academic experiments. They wanted to see how is it like, you know, the great yogis' minds, right? When we put them under, what are those brain scans called? You know, when we put brain scans, right? When we put brain scans, how does the brain, right, of these great yogis,
CT scan.
Yes, CT scans and all stuff. How are their brains working when they're doing all of these meditations, right? And so there was a big hype around him. And so he gained a rather large Western following, interestingly enough, because he was the subject of a lot of research, right? And he was a big Advaitin. And what happened? With all of his fame, it just meant that when they found him, you know, maybe being less than a brahmachari with his female disciples, it just meant that with all that fame, more and more people found out about it, right? Because of this phenomenon, right? You can do all of these meditations and all, but until you really learn to tame and control your senses appropriately, you're jumping into the deep end of the pool. Now, somebody might say, oh, well, we hear the same stories about devotees, right? So what are you talking about, Doshan Krishna Das? But this principle applies just as much to devotees, actually, right? To not dive in inappropriately, right, into where we are not yet qualified for. It is not that this condemnation only applies to impersonalists, but in many ways it does, because impersonalists don't have the foundation, right, of nectar to fall onto. But if a devotee is not relishing that nectar, then naturally that will happen as well. It is not that I'm saying that one team is better than the other, right? Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he hated this mindset, actually. He once got in trouble in the British courts in colonial India. They had these laws of civil distress, civil disruptions, right? And so some of the Brahmins, they had sued Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. They sued him because they said he is causing anti-Brahmin sentiment, because he has a display. As part of preaching, he would have these like animatronics, right? These sort of these statues and all of these things in order, these exhibits, right? I forgot what they were called. They were called like the wonderful theistic exhibitions or something. And one of the exhibits had had this Brahmin, and I forgot now what the Brahmin was holding. It was some sacred item. It was some replica of a sacred item, and he was using it as a nut cracker to crack open some nuts, right? And the whole idea was that in Kali Yuga, the Brahminical culture is so destroyed that even the average Brahmin, what is he using his Brahminical status for? He's using it to make money, right? And to feed himself, right? So he's practically using it to, you know, as a nutcracker, right? In order for his own gain and his own enjoyment. And so they brought this case to the courts, and there was a long dispute. And Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he said, oh, I'm not criticizing just the Brahmins outside of my community. The Brahmins in the Gauriya and Vaishnava community, they're doing the exact same thing. And then what he said is, he said, okay, I'll fix the problem. And he made sure that the next time that exhibit was done, they drew a tilak on the Brahmin, right? And then therefore they rested the case, right? Because he was doing that to show he wasn't trying to cause disharmony between the communities. He was just trying to call out hypocrisy, right? So coming back to the central point, when I use those examples, it's not that I'm using them to say one camp is better than the other. I'm rather using it to say a principle, right? And the principle is, unless we absorb ourselves in the beautiful form of Sri Syam Sundar in his wonderful nectarian name, then very naturally it becomes hard to maintain that in Kali Yuga. And also, irregardless if one has not tamed their senses, if they are in the Gauriya Vaishnava community or not, then they can be considered under this category. We should not fall under the trap of thinking if one has an ISKCON Life membership card, they are a pure devotee. And if one does not have an ISKCON Life membership card, then they are deep in the depths of Maya. Okay, so this is an issue, again, Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he did not have that exhibit there in order to be controversial, right? Every day on the news, we will hear hypocritical pretenders in spiritual life. Every few days, we will hear a story about, in India, we'll hear every few days a story about this Swami, and that Swami got caught doing this, got caught doing that. and also all around the world. In America, it's a whole genre of news. You know, this priest got caught doing this priest got caught doing that. Unfortunate, right? But this is the reason why, right? It is inappropriate and immature renunciation. And so we can see how much damage has it done in this modern world, right? How disillusioned are people with religious institutions, primarily because of this, right? Because of the hypocrisy they see in people who have inappropriately and immaturely taken up to renunciation. So it is very practical and is very verified by our lived experience. Now, what is the time? It is 11:01. Let's have our 5-minute break. We will have an activity on the other side. We'll come around to it then, hopefully. I'll see you all at 11:06. Okay, Hare Krishna. Okay, so here we find it. This is a really central theme, okay, to this section. In fact, I would say this is the central theme for this section, which is that what matters more is not the actions that you do, but the mindset that you do it in. And so 3 to 6, 3, 6, and 3, 7, they contrast against each other well. Maybe we can, Nandan Prabhu, would you like to read out the Sanskrit and English of 3, 6? And then maybe Nitai Prabhu, would you like to do the same for 3, 7 after him?
3, 6. Karma indriyani samyamya ye aste manasa smaran indriyartan vimudatma mityacharasa uchyate. Translation: one who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on the sense objects, certainly deludes himself, and is called a pretender. Mityachara.
Jai.
Okay, should I go?
Yes.
Yes. Yastvandriyani manasani yam yarabha paterjuna karmendriyai karma yogam asakta sa visisyate. Sorry if I butchered that.
No, that's all right. That's all right. It's hard to do it on the spot.
Yeah. On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior.
Yeah. Don't worry about butchering shlokas. If you've done enough Bhagavatam classes, you'll have the embarrassing moment where you sing the shlok in the wrong tune, and then you have to stop yourself and then start from the beginning again. So once you've experienced, I've done that many times, so I can't judge anyone. You're all free to butcher it much worse than you did, which was not bad at all. Okay, so here we find Krishna. He's contrasting the two things, right? So one who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender, right? But on the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses in the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior, right? Srila Prabhupada was really a fan of situating karma yoga in Krishna consciousness. There's one quote once where somebody was asking Srila Prabhupada about karma yoga, and Srila Prabhupada, he said, karma yoga is for fools, practice devotional service. So we'll find sometimes, it's just reinforcing the idea. Prabhupada is very keen on emphasizing Bhakti yoga, but we still should have a good understanding, not only of the flow of the Gita in terms of elevating Arjuna, but also of the yoga ladder in the build-up to Bhakti. So here we find that really, really focal theme, I would say, of the Bhagavad-gītā. This is a really recurring idea. Your actions don't matter. The color of your cloth doesn't matter. It's your consciousness that matters, right? We are in ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, not the International Society for Saffron Dhotis, right? So it's all about what your internal mood is. It's not about what's going on outside. And a mityachara is very, very damaging, as we've already established, right? They're just, Prabhupada writes, a disturbance to society. And again, we've seen all of that, right? On the other hand, much higher is the grihastha, right? who was very much renounced, who was acting in Nishkama Karma Yoga. He is much, much more superior, right? Because he's actually substantially achieving what the sannyasi already should have achieved, right? So therefore, he is superior. And this is an important mindset to have. Sometimes we can really get concerned about, and this is maybe slightly tangential, but I wanted to address it here. Often we hear this idea, right? I don't know how many people think this here, probably not too many, but many people are under the impression that a guru has to be a sannyasi, right? A sannyasi, your initiating guru has to be sannyasi, etc., etc. He's on the ISKCON guru list, right? We'll often hear this idea thrown around, and even if people know that that's not true, they'll often feel that way, right? You know, oh, if they're saffron, then they can be, you know, then they'll be my guru. No white wearing people can be my guru. But this is not the way our parampara has worked, nor is this the message of the Bhagavad-gītā, right? We are concerned with essence, not substance. Firstly, by the fact that saffron didn't even exist in our line until 103-4 years ago. And secondly, because at least in our line, most of the gurus were grihastas for a long while. If you look through the Diksha line, it was the custom for a while that it would be grihastas who would be the main initiators, and that the renunciates would act more like shiksha gurus. That used to be the tradition. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur especially upended all of that. But we find that in our tradition, and it's very wise. And the reason why this was done, we had the real establishment of the Grihastha Guru, was for this reason, right? There's just a little less risk in a Grihastha, right? Because Grihasthas are situated in all of these things. Whereas sannyasis, they have that extra burden of really having to make sure their senses are in control. Whereas Grihasthas have much more of an ability, right, to engage those appropriately. Now, I'm not saying that somebody who's on the platform of Nishkama Karma Yoga really should be a guru. They should be much, much higher than that. They should be practicing Bhakti Yoga. But for this general principle, right, that Grihastha life is far more stable in this sense, right? There's far less risk involved, which is why I think it's very good. I think Grihastha gurus are growing more and more in ISKCON, and I hope they grow much more as our society develops. We need more gurus. How many ISKCON devotees are there, and how many gurus are there? There's like 80, and the list is small, right? We need much more gurus, and once we have a shift that saffron does not mean guru, and guru does not mean saffron, I think that would be very, very healthy for this society. But anyways, that's a slightly tangential to the essential point, which Krishna is making, which is, again, the renounced Grihastha is much more elevated than the attached sannyasi. Okay, so actually, before we go to the slide, we'll just conclude the section now. The rest of it, I think, is really building upon this point, so we'll probably shoot through all of this. Text 7. Yastvendriyani manasa niyamyara bhate Arjuna karmendriyaihi karma yogam asakta sa vishishyate. Maybe let's have Mrugank Prabhu. Would you like to read out the translation? Oh wait, no, sorry. What I read out text 7. Text 8. Niyatam kuru karma tvam karmajyayo hyakarmanaha sharira yatrapi chate na prasidhyed akarmanaha.
Yep, translation.
Yeah.
Perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work.
Yes. So this is the point we were making earlier. How can you stop working, right? At one point you have to eat, right? Even the sannyasi works to eat, right? He begs, or she begs, right? The sannyasi begs, right? So if the sannyasi begs, then even they are working, right? So Krishna is making this point. Baladev Vidyabhushan, he has this really nice point. He says, Arjuna, either way you're going to have to work, and you are not qualified to work as a sannyasi begging, right? So therefore, if you have to work, then work in this appropriate way. And then let's go on to the next text. Tat karma no nyatra lokoyam karma bandhanaha tadartham karma konteya mukta sangha samachara. Let's have, who hasn't gone? I think everyone, Vidhi Mataji, would you like to read out the English?
Sure, Prabhu. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way, you will always remain free from bondage.
Jai. So now this text 9 is very much a transitionary text, transitioning into the next section, which is 10:16, which is 10 to 16, right? This section here will be the section that we'll conclude with today, text 10 to 16. And what it entails is how we go from karma kanda to karma yoga. So now Krishna really seems to do this as a pattern, right? In the second chapter, he begins with Gyana and then he drops all the way down to get your heavenly planets, get your, whatever, right? And then he builds his way up and then we're there at the Sthita Pragya. We're going to find a slightly similar pattern here, right? So he's opened up with Nishkama Karma Yoga, right? And now he's going to explain this sort of transition, this sort of upward building from karma yoga to, from karma kanda activities to karma yoga. And of course, what are karma kanda activities defined by? You can tell me. What are karma kanda activities defined by?
The one that is done in according to Vedas, but for the fruitive actions.
100% correct. And what is the main thing that's done in order to attain those fruitive actions? What would you say is the heart, right, of all of that?
Yagyas?
Yagyas, exactly, right? So both correct. It's a question that you can answer in many ways, right? But it's all the same thing, right? So how do we attain those nice fruits, right? How are we attaining those? Mainly through yagya, right? And this is, sometimes people will struggle with this point, right? They'll be confused, but actually this is one of the most logical points of all of Shastra. We all experience this in our life. You have to give in order to get, right? Sacrifice in order to get is the way the world works, right? We don't get anything without getting anything. We don't get anything without giving anything, right? No pain, no gain, as they say. So yagya is a very basic principle of reality. And the karma kanda section really opens up this world of what is the most effective way to give in order to get, right? So this is the nature of it. So what does Krishna say in text 9? Work done as a sacrifice to Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction. In that way, you will remain free from bondage. What's interesting? Again, this is another example of Srila Prabhupada. He reads things. He reads everything through the light of Krishna consciousness. What is the word yagya translated as, right? Do everything for the sake of sacrifice. But who is the main object of all sacrifice? It is Krishna. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada has rendered this as do everything, right? For Krishna's satisfaction. Do everything, right? As a sacrifice to Krishna. And before we keep on going, I just want to make a point. Here, he mentions Varnashram, right? As being in line with this. But as we go on, Srila Prabhupada, whenever yagya comes up, he'll say all of these yagyas are good and he'll describe all the Varnashram yagyas and all, but he'll say, we can achieve all the purposes of all of these yagyas simply by the yagya of Harinam Sankirtan, right? So keep that in mind, right? Again, this is Srila Prabhupada. He's taking the text, which is definitely open to what he's saying, and he's reading it all in light of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the ultimate conclusions of the Bhagavad-gītā itself. It is not that Prabhupada is putting his agenda into the Bhagavad-gītā, because we will find as we go through the texts on their own, they themselves also clearly define bhakti as the ultimate purpose, but it just requires so much depth that Prabhupada, he's making it harder to miss, right? And then, of course, he will further define it in terms of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Who here has read Science of Self-Realization, SSR? Do you remember the section where the academic, he's refused to let Prabhupada give a course at the university, and they have a back and forth in the letters?
It was a long time ago. Is he the one saying that Kirtan doesn't have to mean chanting, could do many things?
Yes, that's the one, right? So Prabhupada, he says, this guy, he's saying that that Srila Prabhupada is not correctly representing the Bhagavad-gītā, right? And Prabhupada initially, he replies with like this really amazing analysis of the Bhagavad-gītā, all of these shlokas, showing that actually everything that we do in this Krishna consciousness movement is based upon the Bhagavad-gītā. But then at the end, they go back and forth, and Prabhupada, I think Prabhupada sort of tells that this guy, he's not really going to get it. And Prabhupada, he says, so simply, what else can I do, right? What else can I do but represent the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Krishna himself? I will take his words because he is the one who has spoken the Bhagavad-gītā, so I will take his message, right? And so this is Prabhupada's approach in a lot of texts. Again, not to say that we can't technically wrangle all of it out. Okay. So what we are hearing here now is we are going again now to the bottom of the yoga ladder. We're going to the karma kanda activities, right? We're going to karma kanda ideals. And so Krishna has introduced that. Now let's go to text 10. Saha yagya praja srishtva purovacha prajapatihi annena prasavishyadhyam eshavostvishta kamadhuk. Let's have Sri Mataji read out the translation.
In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy by this yagya or sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation." Jai.
So here we read, right? The Prajapati, the Lord of all creatures, he sent everyone out. Srila Prabhupada, who does he say the Prajapati is? Who can tell me quickly? Who knows? He defines who the Prajapati is. Can anyone tell me? Vishnu, yes. And this is also how Baladev Vidyabhushan takes it. Interestingly enough, and this is just pure trivia, really, but Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that it's Brahma, right? So here we find just the point that I always like to make. Our acharyas, they can slightly have different understandings and different takes of things, and we shouldn't find this too confronting, because sometimes devotees really just they have existential crises after they find out that our acharyas might say things slightly differently. So what does he say? In the beginning of the creation, the Lord of all creatures set forth generations of men and demigods. And then we hear text 11, which is speaking further about that. Devan bhavayatanena te deva bhavayantuva parasparam bhavayantaha shreya param avapsyatha. And then let's have Uma Mataji. Would you like to read out the translation?
Yes, Prabhuji, thank you. The demigods being pleased by sacrifices will also please you. And thus, by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Jai. Thank you. And then we have the next text, and then I'll comment upon them. Ishtan bhogan hivo deva dasyante yagya bhavitaha tairidattan apradayabhyo yo bhunkte stena evasaha. And then let's have Alex Prabhu. Do you have your Gita with you?
Yep. You want the English of 12?
Yes, please.
In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performances of yajna or sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief.
Jai. So here we find that Krishna, right? Because we will take Prabhupada's definition for this course. Krishna, or Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, He has defined reality in terms of yajna. And I think this is very important to note, and this is very important to understand, right? Because sometimes people will read this section and they'll think, oh, well, now Krishna, he's just talking about karma kanda, right? He's just building this up, right? Krishna, he's just sort of bringing it up, right? He's just talking about the general principle of sacrifice, right? And sacrifices themselves, they're just something to move on above and beyond, right? And definitely there is that aspect. We are moving up the yoga ladder. But it is interesting how the Lord of all creatures, right? In the beginning of the creation, what does he say? He says sacrifice, right? At the beginning of creation, it is not something that is just a tiny little detail that's popped up. This is very much defining our material existence. And I think it's because there's also something much deeper in here, where Krishna, he is emphasizing something that's very important for all of us, right? And that is the basic principle of sacrifice itself, right? Maybe the specific yajnas, we don't really need to do so much, right? Maybe the basic principle that's there, we don't need to do so much, right? As devotees, we can do yajnas, but just by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, boom, done. We've gotten all of the benefit that we could have gotten from all of the yajnas, right? So in this way, we've got it all, right? But still, this principle which is being reflected here is very important. And it's the reason why material reality is defined in terms of yajna, right? Because this whole material world is a purgatory to teach us the lesson, which is we are not meant to exploit. We are meant to give, not to take, right? Renunciation, sacrifice, to learn to give things up. This is a basic element of our spiritual life, right? Not just our material life, but it also necessarily comes in our material life, right? So Krishna, he's not just talking about ritualistic sacrifices. He's talking about sacrifice itself, right? Which is the heart of genuine and meaningful life, right? Sacrifice itself is important. And that's why we will find that even to live, how do we put it? The life defined by karma kanda is what, right? It is sense gratification that is allowed, right? It is approved sense gratification, right? Because what is the principle? Oh, you want to enjoy? Krishna's saying this. I'll give you the best way to enjoy, but the way you enjoy is you have to learn how to give at least something up, right? The basic principle of sacrifice is being introduced here, right? You want to enjoy, you want to have fun? Well, sacrifice. Sacrifice something. And if you sacrifice something, then you will begin to learn how to give. And the more you learn how to give, the more you'll be able to sacrifice more, right? And more and more and more, until eventually, hopefully that flourishes into bhakti yoga, right? Krishna consciousness. What is the difference between lust and devotion? Who knows? In Chaitanya Charitamrita, it said, lust is when you desire the pleasure of your own senses, and love is when you desire the pleasure of somebody else's senses, right? Specifically Krishna's. In the Dao De Ching, which is this Chinese wisdom text, there's a really cool text which says something along the lines of, he who expects nothing can never be disappointed, right? And I would agree, right? He who expects nothing is never disappointed. But he who expects only joy, right? But joy for Krishna, he is always happy, right? Because his expectation is always fulfilled. So if you expect nothing, you'll never be disappointed. But if you expect the joy of Krishna, then you will always be satisfied, right? And if you expect the joy of yourself, well, then you will always be disappointed. So again, this yajna, this principle of sacrifice, it's teaching, how can I learn to be a giver and not a taker? Again, we can remember this was the point that I was pointing out at the very beginning of this course, in the introduction to the Bhagavad-gītā as it is. If we learn one thing, is that the Bhagavad-gītā is talking about this transformation from lust into love. Abhishek Prabhu, he constructs it in terms of surrender, which is practically the same thing, right? Learning to give is learning surrender, because we're learning not to hoard it out for ourselves, right? we surrender all things away to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, including our attachment to X, Y, Z, to this security, to that, and this, right? Surrender and detachment, actually, they go hand in hand. So this is why yajna is there, and this is why yajna is established from the beginning, right? Because yajna is that basic principle which will teach us how to transform this conditioned material life into spiritual, transcendental life of giving and love. Does that make sense? So yajna is not just some ritualistic expression. And here we find, I've listed out here, Prabhupada in 311, he gives a wonderful description of the benefits of yajna, how this chain not just works in terms of cultivating surrender of self-discipline, but also how it works in the general process of sanctifying all of reality. And this is the point that's made, right? He who eats something not procured from yajna, he eats only sin. But by the performance of yajna, the whole world is purified, right? Because again, when one performs yajna, then foodstuffs become sanctified, right? When foodstuffs are sanctified, then, well, what do people eat? They eat foodstuffs. So therefore, one's very existence becomes purified. When your very existence, your body itself becomes purified, well, then the mind, right? The chitta, as Taran Prabhu was speaking about before, this also becomes sanctified. And when the chitta, the mind, the internal reality becomes sanctified, then one can really begin to think purely in the process of Krishna consciousness, right? Or rather, at least in the path of liberation, right? Yajna, in this sense, we can understand is the means by which we transform the world, at least into the mode of goodness, right? If we're doing material, ritualistic yajnas. But if we do yajnas for the purpose of Krishna consciousness, then we are doing yajna, we are doing sacrifice in order to take things into Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness, right? Spiritual goodness, not just goodness in the material world, but in a spiritual sense altogether. And this is the point that Srila Prabhupada brings out, right? The best yajna in this Kali Yuga is the Sankirtan yajna. Actually, Sankirtan yajna is always the best yajna, but we've touched on that before. So then we hear this. And then also we hear the principle, right? One who does not perform these yajnas, what is he? He is certainly a thief, right? This is a principle we will build upon later on. Shavasyam midam sarvam, right? We will touch upon this in Ishopanishad, right? And actually nothing we have is our own, right? In Prabhupada, he makes this point very nicely. And this is also a reminder. It is not that we do not learn spiritual lessons from this, right? Who here can produce some sunlight, right? In order to be nourished, right? Who here actually can produce grains enough themselves in order to eat, right? All of the world right now, what are we talking about? We're talking about sustainability, right? We're talking about renewables and everything. But ultimately, the reason why this is an issue is because we cannot in of ourselves be self-sustainable, right? What does self-sustainability mean? Actually, ironically enough, self-sustainable life means to move away from a lot of human-built contraptions, right? We talk about self-sustainable life means moving away from factory lives. It means relying on farmland, right? It means relying on the sun for energy rather than all of the many different exploitations that we can come up with, right? We are fully reliant on everything else. And so if we take these things and do not acknowledge where they have come from, then what are we? We are a thief, right? This also teaches us about the dependent nature of man. Humanity is so puffed up, right? In we are the king of the world, we are the king of all the species. How long would we live without all the other species? Huh? We are just an ungrateful child that is biting the hand that feeds us, right? And so this principle of yajna also is there, right? Because all these sacrifices, they're often done how? In order to please the devas, right? The demigods. But they're not necessarily done as worship, right? They're done as a way of reciprocating this mood, right? Which is why we are not, worship of demigods as the supreme is not really favored in Krishna consciousness, right? But there's maybe less damage in expressing some gratitude. However, again, all of this gratitude is already expressed by chanting Hare Krishna, right? By chanting, engaging in this Sankirtan Yagya, we have pleased Krishna. And because all of the devas, they are simply Krishna's devotees. They are like the ministers in the government, and Krishna is the prime minister, right? They are all already fully pleased, right? So we don't need to worry about doing them. But for a person who is not engaging in bhakti, it is a good principle because it reminds one, right? Who are you, right? Where do you have all of this arrogance from that you are some great independent personality? This is teaching surrender. Why? Because it is teaching somebody of the reality that one must surrender. No matter what, we are reliant on others. And this is nectarian for the devotee, but this is very, very psychologically traumatizing for the materialist, for the atheist, right? So this is the this is another benefit of yagya. And therefore, one who does not express some sort of gratitude, right, to the fact that they are dependent on others, on something else, if it is in the fullest sense of the term, because where do the devas come from? Where do the demigods come from? They come from Krishna, right? So when we appreciate Krishna, we appreciate the source of all, right? But even at least appreciating the demigods who have given all of these things, right? The demigods who are in charge of the grains and everything, at least we are giving some level of recognition and then can move on fully, right? Of course, there's a lot to be said. Our acharyas, they actually comment a lot about the different dimensions of the role of the demigods in terms of yagya, but I don't want to go over time. But I think this is the central lesson we can learn. Now, we'll find in the purport of text 12, Prabhupada, he talks about these central yagyas that are had, right? He mentions the Pancha Maha Yagya. We won't talk about these much. I just want to quickly mention them because they come up in the purport and people might wonder what they are. I'm not sure how familiar people are in day-to-day life with these, but these are the normal lists that are given. Just quickly, I'll go through them. Brahma Yagya is the main one that we also are engaged in, and that is study of the Vedas, and teaching of the Vedas. Then there's Deva Yagya, which we have just discussed, sacrifices given to the demigods. Of course, we should think, we have this, again, this connotation with, did Shudras do that first one? No, Shudras, to my knowledge, tended not to do many yagyas at all, except with the engagement of Krishna consciousness. I love this question, lets me talk about one of my favorite parts of the 11th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. Traditionally, or rather not traditionally, but with the development of different law codes, right, for organizing society, it was said that Shudras, right, the laborers, oh, they are not allowed to hear the Vedic literature. If a Shudra even hears the recitation of the Vedas, they should be taken away and punished, right? This is what they said, you know, all stuff like this. And that's what it said in the Smriti-śāstrā. And the Smriti-śāstrā was actually likely written by the time that Krishna spoke Bhagavad-gītā in the 11th canto. And what does Krishna say in the 11th canto? What does he say? He speaks the essence of all Vedic knowledge. And he says, oh, I've spoken here, all of the essence of all Vedic understanding. And at the end, he tells Uddhav, he says, please spread this knowledge to anyone and everyone, including the Shudras. Explicitly, he mentions Shudras, right? In Krishna consciousness, we burn away all concerns and considerations. All of these things are destroyed, whether they were valid or whether they were invalid. You can argue back and forth. I'm not too worried about arguing that because I know that by the power of Bhakti Yoga, all of these things are burnt away and discarded, right? All of these things are destroyed. Again, it was the point I brought up at the very beginning, right? This Sankirtan, the fire of this yagya, can burn away the whole world and everything in it. Then there's Manushya Yagya. This is sacrifice done for humanity in general. Pitri Yagya, the yagya for the planet of the trees. No, this is the yagya for the forefathers, right? And then there's Bhuta Yagya. This is sacrifice done for all living beings, right? All living beings, not just humans, not just the forefathers. These were the 5 which defined sacrifice, right? So this is the way that sacrifice was done for all of these different people. All of these sacrifices, they are fulfilled by the performance of the Sankirtan Yagya, right? Of this Krishna consciousness movement. So it is I'm not listing these to say now that we should all engage in them. Merely by chanting, dancing, distributing prasadam, honoring prasadam, we have already fulfilled all of these things, right? Because again, the great reservoir of water can fulfill the purpose of lots and lots of tiny wells. But I just wanted to mention this. And the reason why is in relation then to text 13. And then after text 13, we'll have our activity. Yagya shishta shina santo muchanti sarva kil bishaihi bhunjate te ghanam papa ye pachantyatmakaranat. Let us have, Nicole, would you be able to read out text 13 in English?
Yeah, sure. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin.
Jai. So I bring this up because again, there's different layers of meaning. Prabhupada always, whenever Yagya comes up in Prabhupada, Prabhupada cannot miss an opportunity to tell people to chant Hare Krishna, right? So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada, he's writing, yes, all these yagyas are there, but please chant. Read all of the purports in this section. They're really, really nectarian. They show the vision of the devotee. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he would see hills, right? And he would think, oh, I found Govardhan, right? He would see rivers and he would say, oh, I found the Jamuna. Like this, everything was seen in light of bhakti. However, it's not again that Prabhupada, he's inserting something that doesn't belong. It's not as extreme as Mahaprabhu's case, right? Mahaprabhu was seeing something which wasn't Govardhan and thought it was Govardhan. But 1 second. But Srila Prabhupada, he's maybe not as intense, but still he can see everything in light of bhakti. But on the other hand, these sacrifices, they are also done. So if one is performing these, this text still applies, right? This text applies. Why? These specific ones, the reason why they are done is they are done to atone for these 5 sins, right? There's the Mahapancha Yagya and there's the Mahapancha Pap, right? Just for the sake of time, I will read, no, actually, maybe Jaswant Prabhu, would you like to read out the Sanskrit? And then Mrugank Prabhu, would you like to read out the English?
Sure, Prabhu. Kandani peshani chulli udakumbi cha marjani panchasuna prahastasya tabihi swargam na vindati.
The Grihastha does not enjoy Svarga by a commission of the 5 violent actions towards other living entities caused by using a mortar, grinding stone, the stove, the broom, and the water pot.
Jai. So this text here is talking about just all of the creatures that just in living our life we have to kill. So it's in many ways it's speaking to the issue that the Jains have, right? You'll see Jains, they walk around with a mask, right, in case they don't inhale any living entities. They don't wear shoes so they don't accidentally step on anything, and that's very sweet. And in many ways, I reject the Jain Shastra strongly because they're actually deeply blasphemous of Krishna. They say very, very blasphemous things about him. So I maybe will speak a little more heavily about Jainism than I will, but I can appreciate at least that nice quality, right? But it is also very impractical. You cannot live your house. Oh, just so I can say what the statement was, so it wasn't, I realized I can't just bring that up and not say. They actually say that Krishna, he lived an imperfect life, he committed some sins, and now he's in the hellish planets paying off his bad karma. So I can't really affirm that, right? Anyways, a little tangent. But I don't like to get sectarian, but I think that's just a bit too far for me. But I can appreciate at least this attitude, but it is very hard to live a practical, and which is why, what is it saying here? Grihastha, right? It is hard to live your life in the world and not do these things. And these things are listed, right? Again, it's the whole idea. Even if we're not doing it to gain anything, even then a grihastha has to do yagyas because they're incurring so many sins just by existing. How many creatures are we killing, right? With the mortar, the grinding stone, the stove, the broom, and the water pot, right? How many creatures do we accidentally kill just by doing these simple things? These ones are listed because they're like the most innocent activities, right? They're so innocent. What's more innocent than sweeping? And yet how many creatures do we inadvertently kill, right? By doing them. So therefore sacrifice is necessary in order to have some good actions to balance out the bad. Again, though, we don't need to worry as devotees because we're not worried about doing good things or bad things. We're worried about cultivating loving things, right? We're worried about cultivating bhakti, devotion. And bhakti and devotion, again, there is no loss or diminution. Why? Because it is beyond all these material concerns. So we don't need to worry about these things so much. The reason why we minimize our killing is because of our hearts being softened by bhakti yoga, not out of concerns over doing the good things or bad things, right? It comes from the softened heart of compassion and love, right? It doesn't come from any concern of rules and regulations. But for broader society, that is why these rules and regulations are there. So that's why what Krishna is saying, it applies both to karma kanda and it also applies to devotees, right? Okay, now we're going to do our activity. It's only a short activity. Again, I apologize that we're only going to have a short activity. We're going to have a debate when we come back on January. I think people enjoy the debates. But I'm just doing a shorter one because I realized when I realized we wouldn't have the next 2 sessions, I wanted to get really through a lot of chapter 3 so that you're well off for writing your assessments. We're going to break out into, how many people are there? 13. So we're going to break out into 4 rooms of 3. And if you can all, in text 14 to 15, there is the cycle of yajna is described, which is how yajnas, it keeps the world going, right? It keeps it makes the world go round. So if all of you can read it, and I want you to draw a nice diagram, right? Remember how we did it for the effects of Varna Sankara? We're going to do the same thing in regards to this. So if you could draw a diagram of the cycle of yajna. I'm going to quickly make the breakout rooms. 4 rooms. Create. Okay, so everyone understands activity, right? Just draw the diagram. It's describing a whole cycle, right? So just draw a diagram of the cycle described in these texts. Okay. If there's any questions, please ask, but I think this one's going to be pretty straightforward. I'll see you on the other side. Oh, I'll give you 5 minutes to do this. Okay, so if you'd all like to show your drawings, and then we will conclude this section, and we'll also conclude for the year. Yeah, so one group, was it, I think Nicole and Alex, you did the drawing for your group?
Yep.
Yeah, if we could have a look.
Okay. I sent it in the WhatsApp group.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Let me look at it in the WhatsApp group. Did anyone have one to show, or did you all send it into the WhatsApp group? Okay, everyone sent it in the WhatsApp group. Shy. I'll send the one from Gita Subodhini, but I'll add all of these to the slides. I'll just, yeah, I'll send that one later. But basically the idea is, what happens is the Supreme Lord, he is given the Vedas, right? And the Vedas, they prescribe karma, right? The karma kanda activities, right? And what is the main purpose of the karma kanda activities? It is to perform yajnas, right? And yajnas, they give us rain clouds. Also, this diagram is very cute with the rain around the word rain. I really liked that. Then the rain clouds, what do they produce? They produce food grains. All food, even if somebody eats meat, comes from food grains. Prabhupada, I think, makes this point. Even if one eats meat, your food comes from food grains, because what do animals eat? They eat the food grains, right? They eat the simple plantation, right? And therefore, all of this goes into the living entities. And the living entities, what do? They give offerings to the Supreme Lord, right? And there we've got this nice little circle. And through those yajnas, right? There, yeah, so there's a circle. So you could draw it as the Supreme Lord, and then it's a circle like that, right? Or you can draw the circle in different ways. That's why it's a fun activity. I'll send the Gita Subodhini one after the class is done. So with that, we will conclude the section with text 316. Evam pravartitam chakram nannuvartyati hayaha aghayor indriyaramo mogham partha sajivati. And then let us have Nitai Prabhu read out the English.
Sure. My dear Arjuna, one who does not follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice thus established by the Vedas certainly leads a life full of sin. Living only for the satisfaction of the senses, such a person lives in vain.
Jai. Okay, so here we find Krishna. He has now concluded this section. He's concluded this whole discussion of why we should engage again in Nishkama Karma Yoga, right? He's beginning with why Nishkama Karma Yoga? Why don't you just renounce, right? Why don't you just go off? And again, I'm assuming Abhishek Prabhu did clarify. Arjuna's whole question was, it seems like you're telling me to give everything up. Why are you telling me to do something? That was clarified last week, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. I've just been going with the assumption that you guys all really understand Arjuna's question pretty well. So he's saying, okay, so he's saying, well, there's two reasons. Well, firstly, I'm not describing two things. I'm describing what you need to do before getting to the level of Gyana, right? I'm describing the appropriate level on the yoga ladder for you. Now I'm saying, I'm going to say why you should do Nishkama Karma Yoga, right? So the first half of the argument, which we've just discussed, is you're not qualified for Gyana Yoga, right? So he's talking about why you're not qualified, why Nishkama Karma Yoga is appropriate. And then now we've just read the section where he's saying, even if you're not qualified for Nishkama Karma Yoga, because it seems so elevated, right? This is how you can get to the point of being qualified there. Engage in karma kanda activities and you will learn how to give a tiny bit until you can give everything, right? That is what's being said here, right? So he's clarified these two things. Next year, when we resume, we're going to hear the other side of the argument where Krishna takes a totally different approach in order to make the same thing. But that's what we've covered today. And it's a basic principle, right? We say that these yagyas, they are absolutely necessary. It's often said that love makes the world go round. Has everyone heard this? Everyone's heard this before, right? Love makes the world go round? Or is it not such a common thing? Yeah. So everyone's heard this, right? Love makes the world go round. But the problem is, everyone mistakes love for lust. And yagyas show us that love is not based on taking, it is based on sacrifice, right? And because love truly is based on sacrifice, we can say that love makes the world go round by the fact that yagya makes the world go round, right? Yagya not only reflects that it is love that makes the world go round, but it is actually an expression, at least, of some way in which renouncing, sacrificing, giving things up is the way in which the world works. The world works through sacrifice, not through taking. And again, we can comment on that more, but we're running close out of time. So this is the basic point that Krishna is making. No matter what you do, you're going to engage in some renunciation until you're finally elevated to the highest platform. Okay, so quickly, before we conclude, just again, I wanted to reiterate. So the assignment, originally, I just wanted the 2 questions due by January 1st. Because we're missing out on the last 2 sessions this year, I feel bad making you do the second question, which involves some knowledge of chapter 3, right? You already technically know enough. I just feel bad because of the first one. I don't want to stress you guys out, right? Next time around, no matter what, hard due date. Just for the first one, I wanted to give some leeway. So the second question of the 2 questions, you can hand in 2 weeks after January 1st, right? On the Monday 2 weeks after, which is the 16th or the 17th, right? So that's what's happened. I know it sounds complex. I just didn't want to scare you guys away. Originally, it was all just due on January 1st, but now I've given a slight extension for the second question only. The first one you should have been able to answer 2 months ago, right? Okay, so I hope that clarifies when the assessments are due. I'm sorry it got complex. Again, I just didn't have the foresight that we would miss the next 2 weeks. in calculating the due date. Vidhi Mataji?
Prabhu, I'm sorry, I'm just going through my notes. Could you, instead of me going through my notes, could you please clarify what questions we are supposed to do? I think you said question 2 and 4.
Yeah, the first one is about does Bhagavad-gītā justify like religious violence or terrorism? Spoiler, the answer is no. And the second question is that what is the relationship of Varnashram to Krishna consciousness?
Okay.
That's right, everyone, isn't it? Those are the questions you're all looking at, right? Yeah, and it should say in relations to chapters 2 and 3. So it's asking you specifically to mention those, which is why I wanted to get a little deeper into chapter 3 before throwing that all onto you, which is why I've given that slide extension for that second one. Again, I've given you guys heaps of time just for this first one because I know people get scared of writing. So I just wanted everyone to be a little comfortable with this. I'm just going to give 2 weeks for the next few, for all of the following ones. It's 2 weeks strict, boom, get it in, right? So yeah, okay. I will do late penalties though. Sorry, 5% a day is what I'll take off for handing things in late. So I'm not that much of an ocean of mercy. Okay. Yep. I think that clarifies that. Are there any questions? Oh, also reading, because we don't have the next 2 weeks on. I can't really prescribe too much reading because you'll just read well beyond this. Feel free to read the Bhagavad-gītā whenever. I'm not saying not to read the Bhagavad-gītā. Please finish the 3rd chapter. And maybe, yeah, finish the 3rd chapter. You can either go ahead into the 4th chapter, or I think rereading the 2nd chapter would be really helpful. You can keep noticing things now as these themes get more developed. Yeah, you've never read the Bhagavad-gītā for the first time, in my opinion. Each time is the first time. You never complete your first reading of the Bhagavad-gītā. No matter how many times, it's still the first read through, in my opinion. So go through the second, whatever. Also enjoy your holidays, right? But definitely finish the 3rd chapter, practice your shlokas, do those assessments, and yeah, maybe reread the 2nd chapter, but that's more optional. But please finish the 3rd chapter. Please learn your shlokas. Think of these next 2 weeks not as a holiday, but as a time to grind out your shlokas. So then your life is easier later on when you have to write out your assessments. Vidhi Mataji?
Sorry, Prabhu. It's just a little off track right now.
No.
Where are these questions? Is it in the handbook or is it the Bhakti-śāstrī questions extracted?
So the questions extracted are extracted only from the handbook. So you'll find it in either one. I also had them in some slides a few classes ago. I'll try to find the slide and I'll just send you the slide with the 2 questions.
Okay, thank you.
I think the questions have been posted, Vidhi Mataji, in the WhatsApp group. Jashwan Prabhuji just did it.
Right now? Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
Mataji. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I did send the questions, didn't I? Yeah.
Yeah, I just
so
copied the same ones, Prabhu, what you shared
Sorry?
a while ago. I just copied and pasted the same ones what you shared a while ago.
Oh, and you sent it into the group?
Yes, in the WhatsApp group.
Thank you, Prabhu. Okay, no problems, and then I won't send the slides. Okay, so that's that. So yeah, homework, finish the 3rd chapter. Please learn your shlokas. Who's finished? Nitai's already finished. Nitai's finished all of the questions. He's done every single one in advance. Yeah, please learn your shlokas. If anyone needs any help with shlokas, just message me and we can set aside some time to go through shlokas. I feel like most people here would be confident, but if you don't, also now that my university semester is coming to an end, I'm going to put together an audio which has all of them being recited for your practice. But even then, if anyone has any fears about shlokas, just feel free to message me and we can set aside a time and go through them. Yeah, I think that's everything. Are there any questions related to what we've discussed or related to the, just any questions in general? It can be about the class today or about what we're going to do going ahead. No questions? Okay, if there's no questions, then I will see you all on not this weekend, because that's Christmas, not the weekend after, because that's New Year's. I will see you all on the 9th of January. Okay. Well, happy holidays, happy Advent, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all of the above. Whatever, Hannakah, whatever you're going to get up to, I hope you enjoy it. Enjoy your vacations and all of that international travel that none of you are going to do. And yeah, I'll see you all in January. Please feel free to message me if you have any questions, email me or whatever. Keep the WhatsApp group going, and I'll see you all in 3 weeks. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, everyone.
Hare Krishna.